The House Judiciary Committee hearing room was packed that Tuesday afternoon. Every seat was filled with reporters, staffers, and spectators who sensed that something significant was about to unfold. At the witness table sat Stephen Miller, former senior advisor to Donald Trump and key architect behind several contentious immigration policies. His jaw was set, and his sharp gaze swept across the room like a hawk assessing its ground. Across from him, Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas adjusted her microphone. Her posture was calm, but her focus was unmistakable. Over the next 30 minutes, Miller would cut her off 6 times, each interruption more pointed than the last. But Crockett's 7th remark, deliberate and composed, would silence him completely and alter the tone of the hearing. Within minutes, clips of their exchange went viral, drawing millions of views and igniting a nationwide discussion about respect, authority, and who truly drives political dialogue in Washington. Before breaking down this tense confrontation that gripped the nation, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our in-depth analysis of key political moments. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We appreciate hearing from engaged citizens across the country who care about truth and accountability. To understand why this moment became so explosive, it's crucial to know who these two figures are and why their clash felt inevitable from the moment Miller took his seat. At 38, Stephen Miller had built his career as a relentless advocate of strict immigration enforcement. As Trump's senior advisor and chief speechwriter, he helped design some of the administration's most controversial policies, including the family separation program and the travel ban targeting several Muslim-majority countries. In Washington, Miller was known for his aggressive debating style and refusal to back down. He had sparred with senators, journalists, and critics using the same tactics, speaking fast, taking control of conversations, and avoiding any admission of fault. Facing him was Representative Jasmine Crockett, a first-term congresswoman from Texas, who had quickly gained a reputation as one of the sharpest and boldest questioners in Congress. At 42, Crockett combined courtroom expertise with moral conviction. As a former civil rights attorney and public defender, she was well-versed in handling difficult witnesses. Her personal and professional experiences also shaped her perspective. Representing parts of Dallas and surrounding areas, communities, directly impacted by the immigration policies Miller helped craft, Crockett brought both empathy and resolve to the hearing. The stakes could not have been higher. The Judiciary Committee was examining the long-term effects of Trump-era immigration actions, especially the family separation policy that split thousands of children from their parents at the southern border. Recently released records revealed that officials had been aware of the emotional and psychological damage the policy would cause but moved forward regardless. Miller was called to testify about his involvement in shaping and executing those directives. For him, the hearing was about defending his record and reaffirming policies he still viewed as essential for national security. He arrived armed with data, talking points, and his characteristic combative confidence. To Miller, this was another chance to justify his version of immigration reform, focused on deterrence and strict border control. For Crockett, however, the issue hit closer to home. She had personally toured detention centers, met separated families, and seen the trauma children endured. As a Black woman in Congress, she also recognized the familiar experience of being interrupted or dismissed by powerful men. Over her career, she had encountered many like Miller, those who confused aggression with authority and interruption with intellect. The hearing room was thick with tension. Behind Miller sat his legal counsel and advisors, all in dark suits and serious expressions. Behind Crockett were her staff and several immigration advocates, some personally affected by Miller's policies. A few wore shirts featuring images of separated families. Major news networks broke into regular programming to broadcast the hearing live, capturing every expression and exchange. Committee Chair Jim Jordan called the session to order at exactly 2 p.m. Despite efforts to maintain decorum, the charged atmosphere was unmistakable. Democrats were prepared to challenge Miller's record. Republicans were ready to defend him and redirect attention to current border issues. Yet everyone anticipated the face-off between Miller and Crockett. For the first 20 minutes, the tension simmered. Several Democrats questioned Miller, but he handled each one predictably, dodging inquiries, talking over opponents, and repeating practiced defenses. Republican members offered supportive prompts, helping him reinforce his narrative as a misunderstood patriot. None managed to disrupt his composure. Then, Chairman Jordan announced, "The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for 5 minutes." The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in. Crockett leaned forward, her tone even and assured. "Mr. Miller," she began, "thank you for being here today. I want to start with a straightforward question. Do you acknowledge that the family separation policy caused documented psychological harm to thousands of children?" Miller's response came swiftly, his tone sharp. "Congresswoman, what I acknowledge is that the policy was focused on border security." Before he could continue, Crockett attempted to interject, but Miller talked over her. "The real harm," he insisted, "comes from human traffickers exploiting these children and from prior administrations whose weak policies encouraged illegal crossings." Crockett raised her voice slightly but stayed composed. "Mr. Miller, I'm asking about the specific documented trauma." Miller leaned into his microphone, his tone sharp. "The documentation you're citing comes from biased sources that ignore the bigger picture." "Mr. Miller," Crockett said firmly, "this is my time and I would appreciate—" He interrupted again. "The border crisis was the result of years of failed policies that President Trump and I were working to correct. People like you?" Murmurs spread across the gallery. Chairman Jordan gave a weak tap of his gavel. "The witness will allow the member to ask her questions." Miller leaned back slightly, jaw tight, eyes locked on Crockett. She remained calm, flipping through her papers as if his interruptions were minor distractions. "Mr. Miller," she continued, "I have here a memo from your own Department of Health and Human Services stating that family separation would cause, and I quote, significant and lasting psychological damage to children. This is your administration's assessment. Do you dispute this?" Miller deflected. "What I dispute is the idea that we didn't care about children." The memo clearly says, Crockett tried to continue, but Miller pressed on. "The Obama administration built the cages. They separated families too. They just didn't admit that real border enforcement demands hard choices." The crowd grew restless. Several Democrats shook their heads. Even a few Republicans looked uneasy at Miller's tone. Crockett stayed composed, taking notes as he went on with his long monologue. When he finally paused, she spoke quickly. "Mr. Miller, I understand you have your talking points, but I'm referring to documents from your own administration." Miller nearly shouted. "My administration saved lives. We stopped child trafficking, which you people ignore." Crockett turned to the chairman. "Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that the witness be reminded to allow me to use my time for questions." Jordan tapped his gavel again. "Mr. Miller, please let the Congresswoman ask her questions." Miller sat back, face flushed, gripping the table edge. The atmosphere was tense. Cameras clicked rapidly, and reporters tweeted updates in real time. Crockett met his gaze, her tone calm but firm. "Mr. Miller, I've been a civil rights attorney. I've been a public defender. I've stood in courtrooms across this country, and I have never—" Miller interrupted with a smirk. "Your courtroom experience doesn't qualify you to speak on national security or border enforcement, Congresswoman." The truth is, this time Crockett didn't interrupt or appeal to the chairman. She simply folded her arms and waited. Miller continued for about 30 seconds, his voice echoing through the chamber as he ranted about border policy, trafficking, and what he called democratic failures. When he finally stopped, perhaps expecting her to respond, Crockett remained silent. 1 beat, 2 beats. The quiet was thick and heavy. Then she spoke, calmly, deliberately, with a weight that commanded the room. The chamber was so quiet that even the air conditioner's hum was audible. Every eye was fixed on Jasmine Crockett as she leaned forward, hands folded neatly, eyes locked on Stephen Miller. "Mr. Miller," she began evenly, "you've interrupted me 6 times now. 6 times you've shown this committee, the American people, and everyone watching exactly who you are." Miller started to speak, but Crockett raised one finger. He stopped immediately. "You see," she continued, her voice steady but gaining strength, "men like you have been interrupting women like me all our lives. You interrupt because you think your voice matters more. You interrupt because you believe being louder means being right. You interrupt because deep down, you know that if you answered honestly, if you faced the truth about the harm caused to thousands of children, your entire narrative would collapse like a house of cards in a storm. The room was silent. Miller's face turned from red to pale. His lawyers froze, unsure whether to intervene. Crockett began pulling out documents, placing them neatly on the table as she spoke. Let me clarify what these papers actually say, Mr. Miller, since your interruptions have made questioning difficult. This memo from your deputy at Health and Human Services confirms that children as young as 8 months old were separated from their mothers. 8 months. This report from your own Customs and Border Protection shows there was no system to reunite families. None. And this email chain, which includes your name, shows you dismissing psychological concerns because, and I quote, "The deterrent effect outweighs other considerations." She paused, eyes fixed on him. Miller's hands clenched the table so tightly his knuckles whitened. His lips moved, but no sound came out. "Other considerations," Crockett repeated quietly, her voice low but cutting. "Those other considerations were children, Mr. Miller. Infants, toddlers, kids who will carry that trauma for life. And you knew it. You all knew it. And you did it anyway." The gallery erupted. Some people wept, others nodded. Chairman Jordan slammed his gavel, calling for order. But Crockett wasn't done. "What matters most, Mr. Miller," she continued, voice unwavering, "is that you can interrupt me, talk over me, try to belittle me, but I'm still here. Those children are still suffering. Those families remain torn apart. And you're still responsible." She leaned forward, eyes locked on him, and delivered the line that would soon go viral. "You may have had the power to separate families, Mr. Miller, but you cannot separate yourself from the consequences of your actions. Interrupting me 6 times won't change the fact that history has already judged you and found you lacking. Your legacy isn't strength, Mr. Miller. It's the sound of children crying for their parents, and no amount of interruptions will ever drown that out." The room exploded with noise. Miller's face turned ghostly pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. For the first time in his public career, Stephen Miller was speechless. His attorneys whispered frantically, but he didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on Crockett, stunned and uneasy. The gallery was chaos. People stood and applauded. Reporters typed furiously as the C-SPAN camera zoomed in on Miller's blank expression. Chairman Jordan pounded his gavel again, shouting for order, but his voice was drowned by the commotion. Several Democrats stood and clapped. Even a few Republicans looked unsettled. Crockett sat still, hands folded, calm and unshaken. She had used only 3 of her 5 minutes, but she was finished. She had said everything that needed to be said. When quiet finally returned, Chairman Jordan asked softly, "Mr. Miller, would you like to respond to the Congresswoman's statements?" Miller leaned toward the microphone. His voice, when it came, was weak and hoarse, a far cry from his earlier confidence. I stand by the Trump administration's policies. We were protecting America." The words fell flat. Everyone could hear the weakness. Miller knew it too. The man once known for control and dominance had just been dismantled by a freshman congresswoman from Texas. Crockett's closing words were simple yet final. "Mr. Chairman," she said calmly, "I yield back the balance of my time. Mr. Miller's silence speaks louder than anything else." As she yielded back, the silence in the room carried more power than any speech could. Then something remarkable happened. Members of the gallery began to stand and applaud, not loud or wild applause, but slow, deliberate clapping that spread across the room. Even a few Republicans shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Miller's eyes. Miller sat motionless at the witness table, his once neat notes scattered and forgotten. His team of lawyers behind him looked equally stunned. They had prepared him for every question and every possible attack. But not for this. For Crockett to turn his own interruptions into evidence of his character, dismantling him calmly and decisively. The silence stretched. Miller's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass, nearly knocking it over. The man who once stood at the White House podium, confidently defending the indefensible, now appeared as though he wished to vanish. Representative Ted Lieu, next in line to question him, leaned toward his microphone and said calmly, "Mr. Chairman, I believe Representative Crockett has said everything that needs to be said. I yield my time." One after another, other Democratic members did the same. It was an unusual moment, each member surrendering their allotted time to question one of the most divisive figures of the Trump administration. But they all understood that nothing they could add would carry more impact than what had just occurred. Each act of yielding further eroded what was left of Miller's composure. By the time Chairman Jim Jordan called for a recess, Miller looked like a boxer still standing only because he hadn't realized the match was over. As the room began to clear, he remained seated, staring blankly at the table. His aides surrounded him, whispering reassurances he barely acknowledged. In just 3 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had achieved what years of criticism, protests, and media scrutiny had failed to do. She dismantled the image of moral conviction Miller had carefully built, exposing the harsh reality behind his policies. Within minutes, video clips of the exchange spread online. "Crockett destroys Miller" began trending worldwide. Her striking line, "Your legacy isn't strength, Mr. Miller, it's the sound of children crying for parents they were torn away from," was shared millions of times, turned into memes and printed on protest signs. Inside that hearing room, however, there was only silence. Stephen Miller, the architect of the family separation policy, and a man known for dominating any microphone placed before him, now sat in defeat. Meanwhile, Representative Crockett calmly gathered her papers and exited, head held high. The impact of her exchange rippled quickly through Washington and across the country. Within an hour, the clip had exceeded 10 million views across social media. Major news outlets interrupted programming to replay the moment. Political commentators from both sides agreed. Something extraordinary had taken place. On CNN, Anderson Cooper opened his broadcast with the unedited 3-minute exchange. "In my 20 years covering politics," Cooper said afterward, "I've never seen anything quite like this." The typically unflappable Stephen Miller, famous for his combative tone and refusal to yield, had been left speechless by Representative Crockett's composed yet devastating remarks. Even conservative networks found it difficult to defend him. On Fox News, Tucker Carlson admitted, "Miller walked into a trap today. He should have just let her ask her questions." Laura Ingraham tried redirecting the conversation to current border issues, but her guests repeatedly returned to the viral exchange. On MSNBC, Joy Reid was jubilant. "This is what happens when you try to bulldoze a black woman who comes prepared with facts," she said. Jasmine Crockett didn't just silence Stephen Miller today. She exposed the weakness of bullies who confuse aggression with intelligence. The political response was immediate. Former President Barack Obama tweeted, "Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas showed us what grace under pressure looks like today. More importantly, she reminded us that the voices of those harmed by cruel policies will not be silenced." President Biden released a statement through the White House. Today's hearing highlighted the deep wounds left by the previous administration's family separation policy. Representative Crockett's powerful words remind us why such cruelty must never be repeated. As expected, Donald Trump came to Miller's defense on Truth Social, posting, "Stephen Miller was ambushed by a radical Democrat who doesn't understand border security. He was fighting for America while she was performing for the cameras." Witch hunt continues. Even so, his defense lacked its usual force. More revealing was the silence from Miller's traditional allies. Senator Ted Cruz, usually quick to defend Trump officials, said only, "I didn't watch the hearing. I was focused on border security legislation." Senator Marco Rubio told reporters, "Everyone needs to lower the temperature and focus on real solutions." Their restrained comments spoke volumes. In the hours following the hearing, Crockett's office was overwhelmed with messages of support. Her social media following surged by over 500,000 in a single day. Invitations poured in from major news networks, but she declined most, choosing to appear only once, on PBS NewsHour, where she discussed immigration reform rather than the viral moment itself. "This isn't about me versus Stephen Miller," she told PBS's Amna Nawaz that evening. "It's about accountability for policies that harmed thousands of children." She explained that Miller had tried to make the exchange personal, focusing on dominance and interruption rather than the real issue. "The American people deserve more than political theater," she said firmly. "They deserve the truth, and the truth is, these policies were intentionally cruel. Those who designed them must be held responsible." Meanwhile, Miller's team launched into damage control, issuing a statement claiming he had been ambushed and that Crockett was exploiting national security for political gain. The message came off defensive and unconvincing. Miller himself stayed unusually quiet, even canceling a planned appearance on Sean Hannity's show that night. Behind closed doors, frustration spread within Republican circles. Several GOP members of the Judiciary Committee voiced disappointment. "He made us all look bad," one Republican told Politico anonymously. "You can't just talk over people in a hearing." Crockett handled him with precision. He walked right into it. Immigration advocacy groups quickly seized the moment. Organizations long opposed to family separation policies now had a new rallying cry. Crockett's searing quote was printed on T-shirts, painted on protest signs, and turned into a viral hashtag. Families once separated at the border began sharing their stories again, empowered by seeing a member of Congress hold Miller publicly accountable. Legal experts soon weighed in on the documents Crockett presented. Many of the materials she cited, previously overlooked, clearly showed that the administration had known about the psychological harm its policies would inflict, and continued regardless. Several former prosecutors noted that these documents could strengthen ongoing lawsuits filed by affected families. Representative Crockett's strategy was brilliant. "From a legal standpoint," said constitutional law scholar Lawrence Tribe, and she didn't just confront Miller publicly, she entered critical evidence into the congressional record. His failure to respond effectively was seen as a silent admission, a detail that would later hold significance in court. The cultural impact, however, was equally deep. That exchange quickly became a lesson in power, interruption, and respect. Women's rights advocates highlighted the hearing as a clear example of how interruptions can assert dominance and how women can push back with strength and composure. The hashtag #Don't Let Her Speak gained traction online, with thousands of women sharing personal stories of being interrupted or dismissed in workplaces and public spaces. Many corporate diversity and inclusion teams began using the hearing video in their training programs. "This is exactly what we mean when microaggressions grow into macroaggressions," explained Dr. Kenji Yoshino, director of NYU Law's Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. Miller's interruptions weren't simply rude. They were an attempt to challenge a congresswoman's rightful authority. Crockett's calm but firm response became required viewing in discussions of power dynamics. Within a week, the long-term political consequences were evident. Miller's influence in conservative circles plummeted. Several Republican candidates quietly distanced themselves, avoiding his endorsement, while his once lucrative speaking invitations disappeared as organizers sought to avoid controversy. Meanwhile, the family separation policy, previously fading from headlines, returned to national attention. The Biden administration soon announced new efforts to reunite separated families. Congress began debating compensation for victims and measures to ensure such policies could never be reinstated. Crockett used her growing platform wisely. Avoiding self-promotion, she remained focused on practical reforms. She introduced the Family Protection Act, which prohibited family separations at the border except in proven cases of abuse or trafficking. The bill gained bipartisan support, with several Republicans co-sponsoring it to move beyond the previous administration's controversial policy. She also began mentoring young women, especially women of color, pursuing public service. Speaking at a Houston leadership conference, Crockett told a group of aspiring Black leaders, "That hearing wasn't just about me and Stephen Miller. It was about every woman ever told to stay quiet, to wait her turn, or to let men speak. You don't have to accept that. You deserve to be heard, respected, and empowered to hold power accountable." The incident also revived scrutiny of the Trump administration's immigration record. Journalists filed new Freedom of Information Act requests inspired by Crockett's revelations, which led to further disclosures. Whistleblowers came forward with new evidence about how the separation strategy had been planned and executed. 3 months later, the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General released a detailed report validating most of Crockett's claims. It confirmed that officials, including Miller, had been repeatedly warned about the emotional harm caused by family separations, yet continued regardless. viewing trauma as a deterrence tool. Miller later tried to reclaim his image through an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, defending his record and accusing Crockett of chasing attention over border security. The piece was widely criticized for its defensive tone and for ignoring key facts Crockett had presented. A year after the exchange, it was still being studied and discussed. It appeared in a major documentary on U.S. immigration policy, featuring interviews with Crockett and families directly impacted by separation. Miller declined to participate. The documentary received several awards and renewed focus on the trauma endured by separated families. Professors of political science soon began using the exchange as a case study in leadership and communication. It's a perfect example of how preparation, composure, and moral conviction can overcome aggression, said Dr. Jennifer Lawless of the University of Virginia. Crockett didn't raise her voice or mirror Miller's hostility. She used his own conduct to strengthen her moral and factual position. The influence spread in surprising ways. In subsequent hearings, when witnesses attempted Miller-style interruptions, committee chairs often intervened, saying, "We're not doing Miller interruptions here." Across industries, women began sharing their own Crockett moments, situations where they turned disrespect or interruption into opportunities to display confidence and competence. The phrase "pulling a Crockett" entered the political lexicon, referring to calmly transforming an opponent's aggression into an advantage. For Stephen Miller, the damage was lasting. Though his loyal supporters claimed he was unfairly maligned, his role in mainstream conservative politics never recovered. His public appearances were limited to sympathetic podcasts and smaller gatherings. The man who once shaped national policy from the White House had been pushed to the periphery, undone by a moment when a freshman congresswoman left him speechless. Legal consequences followed. Several lawsuits filed by separated families cited the hearing transcripts, particularly Crockett's documentation of officials' awareness of the psychological harm caused. In a landmark ruling, a federal judge referenced the hearing while awarding damages, writing, "As Representative Crockett demonstrated, the cruelty was not accidental. It was deliberate." 2 years later, Crockett published her book, Uninterrupted, Speaking Truth to Power in America, which became a bestseller. The chapter describing the Miller exchange drew the most attention. She wrote, "That moment wasn't rehearsed. I had questions prepared and I had my documents, but after Miller interrupted me for the 6th time, it became clear. His behavior wasn't just disrespect toward me. It symbolized how his policies had disrupted thousands of families, children torn from their homes, parents separated from their duties to protect, communities shattered by fear and grief. When I finally spoke, I wasn't just speaking for myself. I spoke for every child crying in detention, for every parent whose child was taken away, and for everyone told their pain didn't matter. Miller thought his interruptions could silence me. Instead, they exposed his guilt, not just in that hearing room, but in history. Because men like him never truly understand. You can interrupt our words, but not our truth. You can speak over us, but not silence justice. You can control a moment, but you can't hide from accountability forever. Her book tour reignited national attention on immigration reform and boosted her public profile. Speculation about her political future grew rapidly. Discussions of a potential Senate run or even higher office spread widely. She brushed off such questions, saying, "My focus is on the job Texans sent me here to do. If I do it well, the future will handle itself." Meanwhile, the broader effect on political dialogue deepened. The Crockett-Miller confrontation became a symbol of a new form of accountability, one grounded not in shouting, but in facts, composure, and moral strength. Political consultants began advising clients to learn from her approach. The old method of dominating and interrupting doesn't work when your opponent can turn it against you, a Republican strategist told Politico. Crockett demonstrated that preparation and calmness always outshine arrogance. In journalism schools, professors began teaching the exchange as an example of how political theater can transform into genuine accountability. Crockett didn't just create a viral clip, said Columbia Journalism School's Emily Bell. She used Miller's own behavior to reveal the cruelty of his policies. That's communication that transcends partisanship. The emotional effect on separated families was even deeper. Many said they felt seen for the first time. Watching him finally face accountability was healing, said Maria Santos, whose son was taken from her at the border at age 3. For so long, it felt like no one in power cared. Representative Crockett made us feel heard. Support groups began using clips from the hearing and therapy sessions for parents and children. Psychologists noted that even symbolic accountability helped families process trauma. It's not legal justice, explained Dr. Louise Zeus, who treated separated children. But seeing someone powerful acknowledge their pain has real healing power. 3 years later, the hearing's legacy remained strong. Crockett's line, "Your legacy isn't strength. It's the sound of children crying for parents they were torn away from," became one of the most quoted statements in modern politics. It appeared in memorials, academic studies, and speeches condemning family separation. By then, Crockett had become one of the Democratic Party's most sought-after voices. Yet she remained focused on policy. She passed multiple bills on immigration and child welfare, often saying, "Every bill I write, every speech I give, I think of those children. They deserve better. We all do." Miller, in contrast, withdrew from public life. His attempts to rebuild his image through interviews and op-eds failed. The image of him sitting silent before Crockett became his defining legacy. Analysts consistently pointed to that moment as the collapse of his influence. The broader message for American democracy was clear. Truth, preparation, and moral conviction can still overcome hostility and cruelty. In a political age dominated by spectacle and noise, Jasmine Crockett proved that integrity and substance still carry weight. Her steady, confident response became a guide for holding power accountable. The story of how Jasmine Crockett turned 6 interruptions into her opponent's undoing has become more than a viral clip. It's now a study in leadership. What made her response effective wasn't just her words, but her control and her ability to turn disrespect into a revelation of moral failure. She didn't shout back. She let his conduct expose itself, then connected it to the human cost of his actions. Her 7 defining moments were: her first question about documented trauma, her effort to cite specific memos, her request for respect of her time, her reference to HHS documents, her mention of her civil rights experience, her calm silence through his 6th interruption, and finally, the line that ended his credibility. "Your legacy isn't strength. Mr. Miller. It's the sound of children crying for parents they were torn away from." For anyone facing a Stephen Miller, someone who mistakes loudness for logic, Crockett's example offers a clear roadmap. Don't fight aggression with aggression. Let their behavior show their character, then respond with calm, informed truth. The ripple effect continues across politics and culture. Young professionals now study the exchange as a model for handling disrespect. Law schools analyze it as a lesson in witness control. Political scientists cite it as a turning point for meaningful congressional oversight. Most importantly, the families affected finally heard what they'd waited years to hear: that what happened to them was wrong, deliberate, and inhumane. Crockett didn't just outmatch Miller in a viral moment. She gave voice to the silenced, dignity to the dehumanized, and hope to the forgotten. In an era where noise often overpowers truth, her triumph reminds us that preparation and composure still win. It proves that bullies, regardless of power, eventually fall before unwavering truth. As America continues to confront the legacy of family separation and strive toward justice, the lesson from that day endures. Those who interrupt to avoid accountability will ultimately be interrupted by the truth. And when that moment comes, all their noise collapses under the weight of moral clarity. If you found this deep dive meaningful, please subscribe and tap the notification bell. Your support helps us share more thoughtful analysis of moments that shape democracy. Share this video with others who believe in truth and accountability, and comment below with your thoughts. What other moments should we explore next? Remember, in the pursuit of truth and justice, every voice counts. The real question is, will we use ours as powerfully as Jasmine Crockett did that day? The choice is ours. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never let anyone interrupt your truth.